The Vermont resort glistens like a mirage against the autumn backdrop, all polished wood and floor-to-ceiling windows that frame the mountains beyond. I grip Lucian's arm as we enter the grand ballroom, our heels clicking against marble floors that probably cost more than our first apartment's rent. My mind is still processing what Dr. Brooks might want from Medova's patient monitoring system. Why else would he invite us to his wedding? "Goldie," Lucian whispers, his fingers suddenly tightening around mine. The pressure is gentle but urgent. "Your parents are here. 3 o'clock. We can still leave if you want." I follow his gaze across the sea of cocktail dresses and tuxedos. There they stand, Martha and Richard Collins, looking exactly as they did 7 years ago, just with different designer labels. But it's not them that makes my heart slam against my ribs like it's trying to break free. It's the woman in white, holding a champagne flute halfway to her lips, staring directly at me. Grace. My sister. The bride. The invitation sits like a stone in my memory. Dr. and Mrs. Clark, from Dr. Daniel Brooks, a colleague interested in our work, or so we thought. Not once did I connect Daniel Brooks to Grace Collins. Not once did I imagine he could be marrying my sister, the sister who benefited from every sacrifice my parents forced me to make. I can almost feel the blood draining from my face. "I didn't know," I managed to say, though the words feel like cotton in my mouth. Lucian squeezes my hand again. "Of course you didn't." My mind races backwards 7 years to the last time I saw my parents. The dining room table set with the good china, the lingering smell of my mother's signature pot roast, and the moment everything fractured beyond repair. Martha's voice, crystal clear even now. "Goldie, sweetheart, I'm sure Lucian is very ambitious for someone with his background, but Grace's medical school tuition isn't going to pay itself." I'd sat there, 28 years old, finally understanding that the college fund I'd been promised had never been meant for me at all. That the money I'd been working nights to replace had already been earmarked for Grace's future before I even applied to schools. Lucian had seen it immediately, the favoritism I'd spent decades explaining away. He'd quietly helped me from my chair, collected my coat, and led me out the door while I was still processing the betrayal. In the car that night, with my childhood home shrinking in the rearview mirror, he'd taken my hand and said words I still carry. "People who treat others as disposable don't change, they just find new ways to justify it." Now, standing in this ballroom, I straighten my shoulders instead of shrinking away. Something solid hardens in my chest. "We're not leaving," I tell Lucian, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. His eyes find mine, searching, then crinkling slightly at the corners, that look he gets when he's proud but trying not to show it. "All right then," he says, adjusting seamlessly to my decision. He turns to a nearby guest, hand extended. "Lucian Clark. My wife and I know the groom through medical circles." The ease with which he navigates the space, creating a buffer between me and my history, nearly makes me miss my mother's approach. But there she is, Martha Collins, smiling with her mouth but not her eyes. "Goldie," she says, loud enough to turn heads. "What are you doing here? This is Grace's special day." She emphasizes special like it's a title my sister earned and I failed to qualify for. "You weren't on the guest list." The words hang between us. A perfect crystallization of my entire childhood. Not on the list. Not quite good enough. Not Grace. I open my mouth, then close it. Years of carefully constructed peace, of moving forward without bitterness, teeters on the edge of collapse. Part of me wants to confront her lies right here, to remind her of all the times she made it clear I wasn't worth investing in. Another part remembers the photographers circulating, the business contacts filling the room. "Martha," I finally say, the single word neither confrontation nor retreat. "The business we've built, Medova Health, represents years of midnight coding sessions and rejected loan applications, years of Lucian and me proving every doubter wrong. One whisper campaign from my family about fraudulent credentials or stolen ideas could tarnish relationships with hospitals that took years to build." I feel Lucian's hand on the small of my back, that silent code we've developed over the years. "I've got you. I believe Dr. Brooks invited us personally," he says, just loud enough for Martha to hear. He seemed quite interested in Medova's work. You must be very proud that Grace is marrying someone so forward-thinking and patient care. Before Martha can respond, a shadow falls across our little tableau. My father, Richard, appears at her side, his expression hardening as he takes in my forest green sheath dress, the simple diamond pendant at my throat, my husband's perfectly tailored suit. His eyes narrow almost imperceptibly, recognizing the evidence that contradicts the family narrative of my failure. "Dr. Collins," Lucian says, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your daughter's marriage." He doesn't specify which daughter. The cocktail hour buzzes with muted conversations and the soft clink of glassware. I stand near a marble pillar, watching Daniel Brooks work the room with practiced ease. He's everything a successful surgeon should be, confident, articulate, and completely unaware of the Collins family drama swirling around his perfect day. Stanford was brutal. Daniel tells a circle of admiring guests, champagne flute gesturing for emphasis. Those first 2 years of medical school nearly broke me, but I wouldn't trade the experience. My grip tightens on my own glass. Stanford. The very school my parents had insisted Grace was attending with my stolen college fund. I never saw graduation photos. Never heard specific stories. Just vague references to Grace's medical training whenever I asked. Across the room, Lucian chats with a group of hospital administrators, his posture relaxed but eyes alert. He catches my gaze and raises an eyebrow in silent question. I give a small nod, and he excuses himself, making his way to my side. "Your sister has quite the reputation," he murmurs, voice low. "Apparently she's been running your family's clinic for the past 5 years, Doctor. Hargrove over there just asked me how she manages both clinical duties and hospital administration." "That's impossible," I whisper back. "She worked reception at Dad's office after dropping out of college. She never finished pre-med, let alone medical school." "Exactly." Lucian's eyes track Daniel as he approaches us. "This isn't just family revisionist history anymore. These are professional claims with real consequences." My stomach knots as Daniel waves a distinguished older gentleman toward us. "Goldie, you must meet Dr. Weber. He recognized your name from last month's Healthcare Innovation Conference." Dr. Weber's handshake is firm, his eyes curious. Modova's patient monitoring system is making waves in post-operative care. 3 of my colleagues have implemented it. "How's the Boston General rollout progressing?" Before I can answer, a small commotion draws my attention. Grace stands 20 feet away, her champagne flute trembling visibly as she watches Daniel introduce me to yet another admirer. The crystal catches the light, broadcasting her anxiety to anyone paying attention. The moment shatters when my father's voice rises above the ambient chatter. "Goldie just plays with computers," Richard Collins announces loudly, positioning himself between Grace and our growing circle. "She's not a real medical professional like Grace." Conversations falter. Heads turn. Lucian's hand finds the small of my back, steady and reassuring. Dr. Weber frowns. "I was under the impression, miss." Clark developed her monitoring system after identifying critical gaps in post-operative care protocols. The American Medical Association's Innovation Award last spring suggested otherwise. My mother materializes beside my father, her smile brittle. "Anyone can get lucky with a startup these days," she says with a dismissive wave. "Grace has saved countless lives through her work at our family clinic." The words hang in the air, audacious in their falsehood. Grace stares at the floor, knuckles white around her glass. "I think we could use some fresh air," Lucian says quietly, guiding me toward the terrace doors. "They're showing everyone exactly who they are. We don't need to say a word." The evening air cools my flushed cheeks as Lucian closes the terrace door behind us. Before I can process what just happened, the door opens again. Daniel steps out, his expression troubled. "I hope you don't mind," he says, hesitating. "I needed to speak with you privately." "Of course," I reply, curiosity overriding my desire to escape. Daniel runs a hand through his hair. "Something doesn't add up. Grace told me she managed the Collins Family Medical Center for years, that she followed in your father's footsteps. I invested my inheritance to expand the practice based on her experience." My heart sinks for this man, caught in my family's web of deception on what should be the happiest day of his life. "That's not all," he continues, voice dropping. "I've arranged partnerships with colleagues based on Grace's credentials and your family's connections." Several specialists have committed to joining the practice. Lucian steps forward. This isn't just about what they did to Goldie anymore. They're building a house of cards that could hurt patients. The realization hits me like a physical blow. If Grace has been misrepresenting her medical expertise, people seeking care could be endangered by her unqualified decisions. The clinic is being considered for a Medicare partnership. Daniel adds, looking ill. Federal healthcare dollars at stake. I thought I was marrying into a respected medical family. Standing on that moonlit terrace, the weight of this knowledge presses on my shoulders. I could walk into that reception right now and expose everything: the lies about Stanford, the fabricated medical experience, the years of deception. One announcement would shatter my sister's wedding day and topple my parents' carefully constructed facade. But would that heal anything? Would revenge for my stolen opportunities make whole what was broken between us? Lucian reads my thoughts as clearly as if I'd spoken them aloud. The truth doesn't need an announcement, he says gently. Just stop protecting them from it. I turn toward the ballroom, where my family continues their performance for an increasingly skeptical audience. Is it really that simple? Not simple, Lucian corrects. Necessary. Standing there with the power to shatter my sister's wedding day, I wonder if revenge would heal old wounds, or just create new ones. What would you have done with truth that could change so many lives? The ladies' room at the Vermont resort is all gleaming marble and flattering lighting, but it offers no shelter when Martha corners me against the row of pristine sinks. Her voice drops to a hiss, sharp enough to slice through the ambient piano music drifting in from the ballroom. You have some nerve showing up to ruin Grace's wedding after abandoning the family. Her fingers grip her clutch purse like she might swing it, always so selfish. Two bridesmaids in matching periwinkle dresses pause mid-lipstick application, eyes widening in the mirror. One whispers something to the other, and just like that, the gossip ripple begins. I recognize the familiar burn of public humiliation, the same heat that colored my cheeks at family dinners when my parents made it clear which daughter mattered. I open my mouth to defend myself, but the door swings open. A third bridesmaid enters, stops and squints at me. Wait, aren't you Goldie Clark, from that feature in Medical Technology today, the patient monitoring system? Martha's face freezes in a grimace as the young woman pulls out her phone. Would you mind a photo? My sister's in biomedical engineering at MIT. Outside, I find Lucian holding his ground against my father. Richard's face has turned the dangerous shade of red that used to precede his loudest lectures. A security guard hovers uncertainly beside them. Sir, these people aren't on the approved list, my father insists. Lucian calmly removes our invitation from his jacket pocket, unfolding it with deliberate precision. Dr. Brooks invited us personally. The security guard nods and steps away, leaving my father speechless. The reception brings fresh wounds. Grace corners me near the dessert table, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her flute. Everyone knows you stole my research concepts during college, she announces loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. That monitoring system? My fingers tighten around my water glass. The accusation is so absurd, I almost laugh. Grace had majored in communications, not medicine or technology. Later, I spot Richard speaking intensely with an older gentleman whose name badge identifies him as the director of Boston Memorial. I catch fragments, investigation and questionable methods, and my daughter Goldie's company. My hands begin to tremble. 7 years of building Medova, of sleepless nights coding and redoing grant applications after rejections, threatened by casual lies. I slip through French doors onto the terrace, gulping crisp autumn air. Tears threaten, not from sadness but pure fury. The mountains beyond look solid, immovable. Everything my world is not at this moment. Lucian finds me minutes later, silently offering a fresh glass of water. He stands with his back to the doors, a sentinel between me and further attacks. Memorial just signed a contract extension last week, he says quietly. And Mass General credits our system with saving 37 lives in the cardiac unit alone last month. He doesn't touch me, knows I need space when overwhelmed, but his presence anchors me. An elderly couple approaches from the garden path, the gentleman leaning on a silver-tipped cane. He stops before me, eyes bright with recognition. Mrs. Clark? I'm Henry Abernathy. His free hand reaches for his wife's. Your monitoring system alerted my doctors to a post-op complication they would have missed. His voice grows thick. That gave me 5 more years with my Elizabeth here. Elizabeth pats his hand, her wedding band catching the sunset. Changed our lives. When we return to the reception, dinner is underway. Daniel stands at the head table, champagne raised for a toast. His eyes find Grace, who frantically shakes her head, and he falters mid-sentence. Something shifts inside me, a lifetime of accommodation giving way to resolve. I stand, raising my own glass. To new beginnings built on truth, I say, voice steady in the sudden quiet. May we all have the courage to face it. Lucian rises beside me, and to second chances sometimes they come disguised as closed doors. Martha's chair scrapes backward. Richard's hand clamps onto her wrist, stopping her. Something flickers in his eyes, doubt perhaps, after decades of certainty. Lucian nods toward the exit, and I follow him, exhaustion settling into my bones. We're nearly to the grand foyer when hurried footsteps approach from behind. Wait. Daniel looks different now, less the confident surgeon, more a man confronting uncomfortable questions. Can we talk privately? In a quiet alcove, Daniel runs a hand through his hair. I've been questioning some things about Grace's credentials for weeks. Things don't add up. He glances around before continuing. I have documents claims about her medical training that don't align with timelines she's given me. My pulse quickens. As a respected surgeon, Daniel's concerns would carry weight with medical boards and potential investigators, the very people who could finally expose the truth. I think I can help, Lucian says, his voice taking on the measured tone he uses when forming strategies. Goldie worked in hospital administration before we founded Medova. She still has access to the staffing records. I nod slowly, understanding where he's headed. Records that would prove Grace never held the positions she claimed. For the first time since entering the wedding, a sense of possibility replaces dread. The truth has always been there, waiting for someone willing to look. I slide the folder across the polished oak table to Daniel, watching his expression shift as he pages through employment records I've kept since my administrative days. My heart pounds a steady rhythm against my ribs as years of meticulous record-keeping finally serve their purpose. This confirms what I suspected, Daniel says, his finger tracing the timeline that shows Grace working reception, never in any medical capacity. She told me she managed patient care for 3 years. She answered phones, I reply, my voice steadier than I feel. For 14 months, part-time. Daniel runs his hand through his hair, disheveled from a night of revelations. The hotel conference room we've commandeered feels like neutral territory, a demilitarized zone where truth has sanctuary. Across the room, Lucian ends another call, the 3rd this morning. Dr. Westfield at Memorial has postponed their partnership discussions, he tells us, slipping his phone into his pocket. Said they need to verify some credentialing concerns first. I nod, feeling an unexpected lightness. The weight I've carried isn't gone, but it's shifting. Stanford confirmed it. Daniel adds, tapping another document. 1 semester, then withdrawal. Not the medical degree she claimed. The trail of documentation creates an undeniable narrative, one that contradicts everything my parents have built around Grace. Electronic timestamps, institutional letterheads, signature blocks from department chairs. Facts don't bend to family mythology. My phone buzzes with a notification from Medicare's Partnership Evaluation Board. The review has been paused pending credential verification. The first domino falls. We should head back to Boston, Lucian suggests, gathering his notes. I look out the window at Vermont's autumn landscape, colors blazing against a cloudless sky. No, I decide, surprising myself. Let's extend our stay. I'm not running this time. Lucian's smile reaches his eyes. He understands what this means the first time I've planted my feet instead of retreating from my family's gravity. The calm shatters 3 days later with a phone call from a former colleague now serving on a medical licensing board. Richard has launched a counteroffensive claiming Lucian stole Medova's monitoring technology from the Collins Clinic. He's saying what? Lucian's voice remains level, but his knuckles whiten around his coffee mug. I pace our hotel suite, mind racing. It's desperation. They know the records don't support Grace's claims, so they're trying to discredit us instead. The accusation triggers an intellectual property review, exactly what my father didn't anticipate. By week's end, our attorney presents the board with development logs, patent applications, and prototype testing documentation dating back to our first apartment. Photos of our dining room table covered in circuit boards, video recordings of early patient interface tests, the entire evolution of Medova, meticulously preserved. You were right. I tell Lucian one evening as we review the attorney's report. Remember what you told me when we first started Medova? He looks up from his laptop. Document everything. People who lie about small things will lie about big ones too. The words hang between us, prophetic in hindsight. The IP review clears Medova completely, but it does something else. Board members notice discrepancies in billing codes from the Collins Clinic. Medicare billing practices suddenly face scrutiny. Federal investigators begin asking preliminary questions. As reporters start calling for comment, I find myself frozen before the hotel room window. Should I warn them? I ask Lucian, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. They're still my parents. The question weighs on me like stone. Can family loyalty justify shielding someone from the consequences of their actions? The thought loops endlessly as I consider calling my father. Before I decide, news breaks that Daniel has filed for annulment, publicly citing material misrepresentation as grounds. The medical community in 3 states begins distancing from the Collins Clinic as credential verification becomes the topic at every conference and board meeting. You know, this isn't your fault, right? Lucian says one morning, finding me staring at my reflection. You didn't create this situation, you simply stopped enabling it. His words penetrate years of conditioned guilt. That afternoon, I purchase a leather-bound journal and begin writing everything: the stolen college fund, the years of favoritism, the lies that built careers. Words flow from a place long silenced, filling pages with truths I'd swallowed to keep peace. The hotel phone rings on our 10th day in Vermont. Martha's voice wavers between anger and panic. You need to fix this mess, she demands, tears evident in her tone. The Collins name will be ruined. I listen without interrupting, struck by how she frames this as my responsibility, still casting me as the family problem solver while denying me family belonging. I can't fix facts, Mother, I finally reply. After we hang up, I open my email to find an invitation from the Northeast Healthcare Conference. They want me to speak about medical technology, ethics, and patient advocacy. The contrast between morning and afternoon couldn't be starker. My phone rings again near midnight. Grace's name illuminates the screen. When I answer, her sobbing fills the line. They seized the clinic records, she manages between breaths. Dad and Mom are saying it's my fault for letting you back into our lives. The blame shifts yet again, searching for any target except those who created the deception. 3 days after the incident, the vinyl booth at Riverside Diner squeaks as I slide in, the cracked leather cool against my thighs. Grace sits opposite me, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She looks nothing like the radiant bride from 3 weeks ago. Her fingers twist a paper napkin into a tight spiral. Thank you for coming, she says, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know who else to call. Lucian sits at the counter, close enough to intervene but giving us space. We'd argued about this meeting. He didn't want me to come alone. Now I'm grateful for his insistence. They're making me the scapegoat, Goldie. Grace leans forward, eyes glistening. The investigators think I orchestrated everything. Dad and Mom are telling them I handled all the paperwork, that they just signed what I put in front of them. Her hand reaches across the table. You have to tell them I was just following orders, that I didn't know what was happening. I watch her fingers trembling against the laminate tabletop. 7 years of distance hasn't dulled my ability to recognize when Grace is lying. Lucian catches my eye, tilting his chin subtly toward Grace's lap. Her free hand holds her phone beneath the table, thumb moving rapidly across the screen. Who are you texting, Grace? I ask. Her eyes widen. No one. I won't lie for you, I say, cutting her off. Not any more than I'll let you keep lying about me. Grace's mouth snaps shut, her expression hardening into something more familiar. I unzip my leather portfolio and place a manila folder on the table between us. I brought some things you should see. Her eyes dart to the folder, but she doesn't open it. What is this? The truth. I flip the cover open. Inside lie staffing records from Boston Memorial showing Grace worked 3 weekend shifts as a volunteer, not the 2-year residency she claimed. Next comes official correspondence from Stanford confirming her single-semester enrollment before withdrawal. The final page shows clinic billing statements with Medicare codes requiring physician credentials Grace never earned. Lucien approaches quietly, placing a small USB drive beside the folder. "Digital copies," he says to Grace. "The truth doesn't change, no matter how many stories you tell about it." Grace's face transforms as she flips through the pages, defiance melting into disbelief, then crumbling into defeat. She doesn't notice the bell above the diner door jingling or the new customers sliding into a booth near the windows. I do. Martha's silk scarf catches the fluorescent light. Richard's shoulders hunch forward beneath his tailored jacket. Their faces turn ashen when they spot the document spread before Grace. Richard approaches our table with none of his usual authority. His steps drag across the linoleum floor. "What do you want to make this go away?" he asks, voice a defeated whisper. For the first time in my life, I look my father directly in the eye without flinching. I stand, my spine straight, shoulders back. "I wanted parents who were proud of me," I say simply, "but that's not something you can give me anymore." The familiar antiseptic smell of Colin's family medical clinic wraps around me as we gather in Richard's office later that afternoon. The scent that once represented endless night shifts working to replace my stolen college fund now feels strangely purifying. Richard sits heavily in his leather chair, the creases around his eyes deepening as I place the legal documents on his desk. Martha stands rigid by the window, fingers pressed against her lips. "What are these?" she asks. "Papers from my lawyer," I explain. "I'm formally renouncing any inheritance or family connection." Richard's shoulders slump. He suddenly looks 20 years older, the confident man who ruled our family with unwavering authority replaced by someone small and broken. "You don't need to do this," he says, voice cracking. "We can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," I reply. "This is me choosing freedom over family lies." A knock at the door interrupts us. 2 men in dark suits stand in the doorway, flanked by a woman holding a leather briefcase. "Richard Collins?" The taller man holds up credentials. "Federal investigators, we have a warrant to search these premises and seize financial records." They nod respectfully in my direction as they enter, acknowledging the information I'd provided weeks ago. Tears stream down my face as I watch them begin boxing files. Not tears of sadness, but of profound relief, the weight of decades of expectations and lies finally lifting from my shoulders. The burden I've carried since childhood slides away with each document they collect. Lucien's hand finds mine, squeezing gently. His touch grounds me as the investigators continue their methodical work. The Medicare fraud investigation will likely end with my parents facing federal charges. Martha's perfect manicure won't help her in court, and Richard's connections can't make falsified billing records disappear. Prison sentences remain a real possibility for both of them. Yesterday, a text from Grace appeared on my phone. "Is there any path to forgiveness between us?" I haven't answered yet. Some wounds need time before bridges can be rebuilt. Lucien and I walk toward the parking lot, leaving behind the clinic where so much of my history lives. The sunset paints the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "What now?" he asks as we reach our car. I think about the proposals we've been drafting, the presentations we've been refining. We expand Medova's mission. I tell him, add ethics training for healthcare administrators, make sure other families don't follow my parents' path. He smiles, that look he gets when he's proud but trying not to show it, from damage to direction. I like it. The future stretches before us, unwritten but undeniably ours. A year later, the spotlight feels warmer than I expected as I stand at the podium, accepting the Healthcare Innovation Award for Patient Advocacy. My forest green dress, the same shade I wore to Grace's wedding a year ago now, represents growth instead of camouflage. From the front row, Lucien beams with the same quiet pride he showed when we celebrated our first hospital contract in our tiny apartment, toasting with plastic cups of grocery store champagne. Medova's patient monitoring system grew from a simple belief. I tell the audience, my voice steady where it once would have wavered. That technology should serve human dignity, not replace it. Words flow without the familiar knot of uncertainty in my stomach. The woman who once rehearsed every sentence in front of bathroom mirrors, terrified of public judgment, has vanished. In her place stands someone who no longer needs external validation to know her worth. A week later, an embossed envelope arrives bearing the Stanford Medical School insignia, an invitation to deliver their annual ethics lecture. The same institution my parents claimed Grace attended with my stolen funds now wants me to shape their future doctors. Will you accept? Lucian asks, leaning against our kitchen counter. I run my finger along the letterhead, surprised by the lightness in my chest. Yes, it's an opportunity to guide future doctors away from the ethical blind spots I witnessed growing up. You know what I admire most? Lucian says, placing his coffee mug in the sink. How you talk about your family now, not as someone wounded by them, but as someone who transformed that difficulty into purpose. I blink, realizing he's right. Somewhere between the wedding confrontation and today, my narrative shifted from victimhood to ownership. On our anniversary, I hand Lucian a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside sits a framed photograph of our first apartment, the converted garage, with uneven floors and temperamental plumbing, where Medova began as late-night coding sessions at a fold-out table. Where our real legacy began, reads my handwritten note. Lucian touches the photo with unexpected tenderness. From survival partners to something more. He says, his voice soft, remember how we used to take turns keeping the space heater on our side of the bed to save electricity? Our shared laughter carries the weight of those early sacrifices, transformed now into something precious rather than painful. The Medova First-Generation Healthcare Scholarship announcement generates more publicity than I anticipated. Standing before the first 5 recipients, brilliant young minds from backgrounds much like mine, I recognize the irony. My parents' betrayal, painful as it was, forced me to build something uniquely my own rather than following their prescribed path. Your family histories don't define your future contributions, I tell the scholars during orientation. Sometimes the most innovative solutions come from those who had to find unconventional paths forward. Later, addressing a classroom of medical students, I place my hand over my heart. The most sophisticated monitoring systems and cutting-edge treatments mean nothing without integrity as their foundation, I tell them, watching understanding dawn across young faces. Technology can fail, markets can crash, but integrity, that's the infrastructure that withstands every storm. A young woman in the front row raises her hand. Did you lose relationships when you chose to expose the truth about your family's clinic? I consider her question carefully. When faced with the choice between exposing painful truths or maintaining comfortable lies, I chose truth even when it hurt. What would you have done in my shoes? Her thoughtful silence tells me she's wrestling with the right questions. Perhaps that's the most important legacy of all.